I'll call to order the March meeting of the Finance Committee. I've been informed by the city clerk that all board members are present, or committee members are present. We also have in attendance the mayor. I see Councilmember Scipio there, Councilmember Larson, and Councilmember Mundy. I'm trying to think, did I miss anybody? Anyway, we will continue. Due to the Safer at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there's a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized and will raise their hand and state their vote. Remind everyone, tomorrow, the General Government, Housing General Government Committee actually meets a half hour earlier, so it will start at 4 o'clock instead of 4:30. There's a very heavy agenda, and we want to be sure Committee Chair Adams wants to be sure we get through everything. So with that, we will go move to the consent agenda. Is there any item that anyone would like pulled from consent? Ms. Adams.
C2.
C2. Do I see any others? I see no hands going up. Can I get a motion to approve the balance of the agenda, of the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the balance.
Mr. Taylor has moved the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. I will now poll the board members, the committee members. Mayor Pro Tem Adams?
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh?
Aye.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah.
And the chair votes yes. So the consent agenda is approved with the exception of C2. If the city clerk will please read that one.
Item C2, resolution approving a new lease agreement with Winston-Salem Speedway Incorporated for Bowman Gray Stadium.
Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Chair Clark. I think it's very important for us to publicly have a presentation on this item. There are a lot of interested parties when it comes to the stadium. And I think if we just provided some details of what this means so that the public will know.
Okay. Mr. Rao, are you out there somewhere? Yes, I see you now. Will you please comment on this?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, Mayor Pro Tempore Adams, members of the City Council. So the item before you this afternoon is a resolution to approve a new 30-year lease agreement with Winston-Salem Speedway, Inc. that will allow them to operate Bowman Gray Racing through December of 2050. The agreement in general terms really is an update of the current agreement. There have been some changes since the 2011 agreement was enacted. We've built a storage building that is now available for their use. The way that social media has evolved over the years, and also just titles. So there's some technical adjustments there. Also just recognizing some of the operational changes and that we have to deal with, mainly with security under this agreement. We would be allowed to work with Winston-Salem Speedway Inc. on finding the sufficient staffing for security. I think first and foremost, we would be looking to use Winston-Salem police officers and Forsyth County Sheriff's deputies. But in cases where there might not be sufficient staffing available, there would be an allowance for using independent security providers. But the first priority would be to utilize Winston-Salem police officers and Forsyth County Sheriff's deputies. The agreement would also reinstate a capital improvement fund that was available in the 2011 agreement so that we can make investments specific to Bowman Gray Racing. It also does carry over the 2020 lease rate for racing. They pay a per race amount, and in 2020 that amount was $4,750. With the cancellation of the 2020 season, part of this agreement would just carry that rate forward into 2021, and then every 3 years, the rate would increase by $250 per race night. So the next increase would be up to $5,000. Because this is a long-term lease, The city will have to go through the upset bid process. We will advertise this lease for 10 days. And if there are no upset bids received, then we will move forward with executing the agreement upon council's approval.
Thank you. Ms. Adams, do you have any comments on questions?
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Rao, how does this new lease corresponds or collaborates with the partnerships with Winston-Salem State University?
Yes, ma'am. So the city does have a separate lease agreement with Winston-Salem State for use of the stadium and the field house. That is a 30-year agreement, so this makes the terms comparable. Because we are making this significant investment in the stadium, the $9 million, city staff plans to work with Winston-Salem State on updating their lease agreement at some point, hopefully here in the near future, so that we can bring back an updated agreement for council consideration as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Larson, you had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Pro Tem, could you just give a quick summary for public view, remind them of the improvements that are currently being made and the end result of the $9 million investment that we're making to Bowman Gray, so everybody understands what that's going to look like, and maybe some comment on the schedule as when we might expect to see public being allowed back into that facility?
Yes, sir, Councilmember Larson. So the $9 million includes the replacement of the restroom facilities on the concourse, as well as the concession stands. It also includes regrading and resodding the football field and resurfacing the racetrack. The project also includes upgrades to our utilities. One of the comments we've gotten for years is the lack of water pressure at the facility, and that's being addressed through this project. We're also making some improvements to the field house, mainly replacing the HVAC units and providing some replaced flooring there on the second level outside of the athletic department offices, really to try to improve the appearance of that space. Right now, the east side and restroom and concession stand are well underway. I think they're installing fixtures in the restrooms now. The foundations for the west side restroom and concession stand are coming up out of the ground. They've completed the rough grading of the football field, which is quite incredible to see how much of the field that they've pared off. They've also installed the new drainage around the field that will be servicing both the field and the track. In terms of timeline, we hope to have the east side facilities online shortly after the start of the racing season. Then the west side facilities will come online later in the season. We're also planning to install the sod for the new football field in early April. We're trying to balance that with the racing schedule in such a way that we can get that sod in place so that it'll take root. And want to do that in milder temperatures. But yet want to do that so that the field will be ready for football season. In terms of attendance and capacity, right now under the governor's current executive order, in a stadium the size of Bowman Gray Stadium, we can have up to 30% of our fire capacity in the stadium. Right now, city staff are working with Winston-Salem Speedway Management to prepare for racing. They are planning to race this season, but they haven't set a specific date as of this time. I think they're still monitoring the governor's executive orders, and so that's where we stand.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, John.
Follow-up question. There's been some discussion about rebranding the stadium a little bit with some nomenclature for Winston-Salem State and racing and trying to accentuate the activities that are going on there. Are we getting a new scoreboard or anything like that out of this project?
Right now, a new scoreboard is not part of the scope of the project, Councilmember Larson, but I think that the design and the color scheme for the facilities that will be on the concourse will better tie into the colors for Winston-Salem State and for Bowman Gray Racing. I mean, whereas before, the restrooms had a green roof and green lettering, the new facilities will be, white, black, and red. There will also be banners that we can have on the facility so that we can switch those out and really tailor the stadium to the season that we're in. So you'll see Bowman Gray Racing banners, here to start the year, and then in the fall we would switch those out, and you would see Winston-Salem State football banners on those facilities. So that's one way that we're trying to, really, if you say rebrand, but at least make the stadium more distinctive, that it is the home for Winston-Salem State football.
Is there any signage going out on Martin Luther King Boulevard? Any new signage?
Right now, we do not have any new signage included in the scope. We're trying to manage the project very carefully, maintaining our contingencies as best we can. There might be a point somewhere in the upcoming months where we can revisit potential uses of those contingencies, but right now we do not have signage outside the stadium in the scope.
Thank you.
Okay, can I get a motion from Ms. Adams?
I move for approval of the item C2.
Second.
And a second from Mr. Taylor. I will now poll the committee. Mayor Pro Tem Adams,
Yes.
Mr. McIntosh,
Aye.
Mr. Taylor,
Aye.
and the chair votes yes. That is approved. Councilmember Burke has joined us. I do want to recognize her. Thank you for being here today. We will now go to the general agenda. Before we do that, let me scroll down here a minute. I have been asked to pull C3 and keep it in committee. That was the one on the $1 million community investment money. Excuse me, G3. Unless I hear an objection, I would like to keep that in committee for a month. Ms. Adams.
Yes. Chair Clark, I don't know why we're doing it, but Ms. Tony or Mr. Rao, if they could explain how long we've been doing this since last year, since we made the adoption to do it. How does this affect
From council member to hold it is what I did, but we don't have to. Obviously, we've been at it a while.
We have been at this a while, and we're already getting pushback from citizens, whether it's CARES money, whether it's any money's coming from the state or the feds or the county. And it just, I just think we need to go ahead and at least listen to it or something. We might not approve it, but I don't know whether this is good for the many agencies that have been a part of the process for so long.
Okay.
I'd like to hear something from the other county.
Any comments from the other two committee folks? Jeff?
That seemed like this is a time-sensitive issue. If there's a real dramatic reason why we need to postpone it, I'm open to that, but I haven't heard that yet.
Okay. Well, the chair has decided we will not postpone it. We will have the rest of this week until next Monday when it's at full council if anybody has any questions. So we will proceed with G3 when we get there. We will first go to G1. If the city clerk would please read that.
Item G1, resolution awarding contract for Fire Station 13 to Holden Building Company Incorporated.
Okay, y'all bear with me. Mr. DeCane, I believe this is in your area. Would you give us a presentation, please?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the committee, and members of the City Council. I'm going to let our city engineer, Mr. Robert Presswood, give you a brief description of the project and where it is today.
Okay, Mr. Presswood.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, and member of the council. This item is for contract to build Fire Station 13, which is a completely new fire station for the city. It's to be added to an area of town that doesn't have the type of coverage that the fire department needs to have. This facility will have 3 bays, living quarters for the the fire department. Obviously bathrooms, restrooms, a decontamination area for staff in it, and then the associated parking and a training room that is secure from the rest of the station, so it could also be used as a public meeting facility. We did have to do a little value engineering to get this project under budget. The item you see before you has that value engineering. It eliminated some parking, moved a generator, so we could eliminate a retaining wall, and some architectural features were changed also. I'll take any questions.
Yeah. Mr. Presswood, it's still over budget, just not as much. Is that correct?
That is correct. The design fee that we have on this project was under budget, so we're using the savings from that, and then we are using a little bit of our contingency.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McIntosh, your comment.
Yes, Mr. Presswood, can you, for the general public and maybe the new council members, talk about what the alt-add concept is and how that comes into play?
Right. When we design a project and come down to the final estimate, sometimes there are items that we would like to have included, but we're not sure the budget will cover it. And so we will list those items as a add alternate in the bid to get prices on it, to find out if the competitive bid process would allow us to include those alternates in the project. On this project, there was a fire museum that was bid as an alternate, but unfortunately, we do not have the budget to cover that.
So if we have quote unquote extra money, if bids come in lower, we'll put back some of the things we value engineered out.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Can I get a motion from one of the committee members?
Move for approval.
I have a motion from Ms. Adams. Did we get a second somewhere?
Second.
Mr. McIntosh is second. We have a motion and a second on C1. I will hold the, G1. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor. You're muted, Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
And the chair votes aye as well. That one is approved, G1. We will now go to G2. If the clerk would please read that.
Item G2, resolution awarding construction contract for Quarry Park Phase 2 improvements to Bar Construction Company Incorporated.
Mr. DeCane, this is in your area again. I'll let you open it up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Clark. I'm gonna kick it over to the city engineer again.
Okay, Mr. Presswood.
Good afternoon again. Yes, the item that you have before you is for approval of the construction contract for Phase 2 at Quarry Park. This is the second time we've bid this project. The first time was significantly over budget, so we brought it back and went through a redesign process, eliminating some features. This project includes a very large picnic shelter, what's being called a signature playground. This playground matches the theme of the quarry and the structure that overlooks the quarry that was built in the 2014 bonds. There's a bouldering wall and bridges and multiple slides as part of this playground. We're also going to be paving parking and creating some more shade structures around or within the playground itself. And then we're also adding, for those of you familiar with the park itself, there's a bank that goes up to the overlook area that faces the parking lot that citizens have used that shortcut to access the overlook. We're going to be installing stairs there to allow access that way instead of having to circle around. Again, this one came in over budget. We've spent some time with the contractor eliminating some items to get it down. This same situation where the design was less than expected, and then we're using some contingency to cover the rest of it.
Okay. Any questions or comments? By the way, who did the original work out there? What contractor?
Bar Construction did, so it's the same contractor.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh?
Mr. Presswood, are there any renderings of this online that the public can see?
We can get them posted, yes. I think they'd be very excited to see what this playground is going to look like.
Great, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
If we could put that in the agenda for Monday night, it sounds very exciting, but we don't have a picture of it.
Okay. We will do that.
Mr. Taylor,
Chairman, I make a motion to approve the item.
we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve G2. I will poll the committee members. Mayor Pro Tem Adams,
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh,
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes as well. By the way, I have been out to that park several times. It is really nice, and this is going to be a great add-on, particularly the playground and the, I'd call it picnic shelter, whatever the term is for that. Be a great addition. Isn't this also where we're putting in the money we got from the Winston-Salem Foundation for the bees, but it's more than that. It's a pollination type thing. So
That's correct. There's a butterfly garden as part of this.
Yeah, it'll all be very, very nice. Thank y'all. We will now go to G3.
Item G3, resolution to approve funding recommendations in the amount of $1 million for community investments in social justice and anti-poverty initiatives.
Mr. Rao. I'll
Yes,
let you
Chairman
start.
Clark, I will recognize Ms. Tony, who will give you an overview of the process up to this point.
Ms. Tony, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Chairman Clark, and members of the committee and council. During the last budget adoption, the Mayor and City Council approved a resolution to form a Community Investments Review Committee that would determine how to spend $1 million for social justice and anti-poverty initiatives. The committee was created about a month after the budget was adopted. It was an 18-member committee, 2 from each ward and 2 at large, selected by the mayor. The committee voted on 5 funding categories for the $1 million. And those categories are grants for social justice and anti-poverty initiatives. That amount was $200,000. Long-term anti-poverty social justice strategies for $200,000. Broadband internet access and expansion and training, that was $300. Heritage preservation and education at $190,000. Mentorship and neighborhood capacity building at $110,000. Then as part of phase 2, well, the committee's work was completed at that time per resolution. They had 3 months to make this determination, and those are the 5 categories that they selected. We moved to phase 2 of the process that started around December, where the mayor and city council determined that 4 of the 5 categories would be opened up for community nonprofit agencies to be able to apply for the funding. The one category that the committee, CERT committee, decided to be managed in-house was the broadband internet access and expansion and training category. And so our IS director had been working with that committee, and he was going to take a lead on that. But the other categories was opened up for nonprofits to apply. So applications were made available in December of 2020, and the applications were due in January of 2021. There were 118 applications that were submitted, much larger than we anticipated, but a great response from the community. And so once the applications came back, we utilized the Citizen Bond Oversight Committee to review and score and provide allocations for the submitted applications. This committee was very familiar with reviewing grants. They had also reviewed the COVID-19 grants that were awarded to the community last year. And so we appreciate their efforts, and they did a great job of reviewing 118 applications and came up with funding allocations. Meredith, if you can show the funding recommendations by the committee. And while she's doing that, I just wanted to acknowledge the chair of the committee and the vice chair of the committee are on the call. Mark Dunnigan is the chair. Gail Anderson is the vice chair. Brenda Diggs was a committee member. She is on the call. And Mabel Stevenson is a member of CBOC.
Ms. Tony, were they members of the ad hoc committee or the bond committee that allocated the money?
They were part of phase 2 that actually reviewed the applications and did the funding allocation recommendation.
Okay, so that would be the bond committee, the allocation part of it. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Would any one of those folks like to comment?
Well, let me, Mayor, if you can bring up the recommendations.
Okay.
And I'll just mention, and then any committee member, I guess, can speak. These are the recommendations on Exhibit A of all of the agencies that they recommended to fund. Keep in mind that each category had a pot of money. You can see the subtotals under each category. So, for example, $200,000 for grants for social justice and anti-poverty. The maximum score was 16. So you could score between a 0 and the highest score would be a 16. And the committee determined to do the funding allocations based on the scores. And so they did a cutoff just because there were limited resources and so many applications of, in general, 10 or higher to allocate the resources. There were a few that scored a little bit under 10 if the committee members chose to pull those based on the population they served or just merit of their application. And then there are a few that were over 10 that they chose not to fund based on the size of their operating budget and their ability to raise additional resources. So 10 pretty much in general was the scale to form the cutoff, and anyone above that received some funding.
Okay.
And so, and you don't have to show it, Meredith, but Exhibit A shows all of the unfunded agencies as well. But these are all of the agencies by category.
Okay. Do we have it? Yeah, give me a book. Do we have any questions or comments from any of the council members? Mr. Mundy, I think I see your hand moving.
Yes, thank you, Chair Clark. This is just a math question. There was $1 million to distribute, is that correct?
So officially, a total $1 million, $300,000 was dedicated to broadband internet access that will be managed in-house, which left $700,000 for nonprofits to apply for the other categories.
Okay, so that's why it's a math question, and I'm not a math whiz, but I'm missing $50,000. When I add up everything on this exhibit, my 200, my 150, my 190, and my 110, I'm coming up with 650,000. So you throw in the 300,000 for broadband, and that's that's 900,000, 900,500. 9,500? Am I
950,000.
950,000, thank you. So is that 50,000 short? Am I missing something?
It does add up to 650,000. Ms. Tony, would you like?
We'll go back and look at the math. It should total to $1 million, but we'll make sure. Definitely could be an error on the Excel sheet.
When you were originally speaking, Ms. Tony, you said that long-term anti-poverty and social justice strategies would be 200,000. I believe you said that, but then again, I can't even say numbers out right. So on the sheet, it's 150. So that might be an explanation, but I do think that there's a little bit of money missing that we would be able to distribute.
Okay, we'll take a look at that between now and Monday. Ms. Scipio, excuse me, Ms. Adams first, then Ms. Scipio. Ms. Adams.
Thank you. First of all, thanks to the CBOC for the work you had to do. I know how difficult that must have been and how much time you spent, not just reviewing the applications, but listening to the commentary from the citizens and probably some of the council members as well. Mr. Chair, at some point after we finish our commentary, I would like to hear from the members or the chairs and the 4 or 5 members comment on this experience. But one of my questions is maybe the process or the rules, if you want to call it. How did one agency qualify for 3 to 4 grants or 2 to 4 grants? How was that possible, or was that part of the deal? Because I see a lot of these agencies that could have probably applied based on their operating budget more than once in one area, but how did you get to decide that one agency would get like 3 or 4 buckets of money?
Sure, I'll take that one, Ms. Adams. Thank you for having us here this afternoon.
Mark, if you would give your name and address for the record. So
I'm sorry. Mark Dunnigan. I was the chair of the CBOC. My address is 2840 Fairmont Road, 27106.
Thank you, sir.
So we did spend quite a bit of time on the call deliberating about that very issue, because there were many organizations that applied in multiple categories, sometimes for the same thing and sometimes for different things. And so for the most, well, for 100% of the time, if they applied for the same item in multiple categories, we only considered them in one of the categories. If they applied for different programs amongst the different categories, then we did consider those programs as separate requests. So there were a few that were granted money in more than one category, if I recall.
Mr. Dunnigan, so, excuse me, Mr. Chair. So you have listed the operating budget, right? But
Yes.
if one agency's total budget is one amount, and the amount of money they're going to receive is more than that, I mean, did that not weigh anything? I was thinking that, like you said earlier, Ms. Tony, that you looked at the operating budgets. I mean, was our goal to fund a total operating budget of an agency or a nonprofit?
There were several requests from several different agencies, Ms. Adams, that exceeded their operating budget. And in every case where an amount of money was recommended to council, it was for a new program that they don't currently operate. And so it was in addition to what they would have in their typical operating budget prior to this grant.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Scipio, you're next.
Thank you very much. And I first want to say thank you to the citizens who took time to look at all of those proposals. I too looked at all of the proposals because my first reaction to the recommendation comes from my experience in running a nonprofit. It's very difficult to raise money for new programs or existing programs in this climate. And I was very surprised at the level of funding. So 2 programs got 100% funding, and then it ran from 6% of their budget to 100%. And so I'm looking at all of the programs and I'm saying, wow, they're going to have to do a lot of fundraising in order for these programs to come to pass. Many of them were not going to impact a lot of citizens. I guess some of the numbers I think they took liberty on, but a lot of it was for staffing, a lot of it was for stipends, et cetera. So I'm concerned about having underfunded so many programs that there won't be an impact. And so I'm not sure if the committee's thought was to give more programs a little bit of money as opposed to actually funding a program so that it would be successful. So I really wanted to understand how that thought process went in your funding mechanism.
I would say in general, your assessment is probably correct. We did weigh all of the factors you just mentioned. We weighed number of residents that would be affected by the particular program they were applying for, the percentage of their operating budget, as we just talked about. And I think at the end of the day, there were so many good applications from so many good organizations that where we landed as a committee was funding as many as possible at as much as we could versus trying to fund particular programs in full as a general rule of thumb.
So did we, I don't know if it did the committee talk to any of the agencies to determine what they could do with this reduced funding? Was that a conversation at all?
It was a conversation, and there were several committee members that had talked to some of the agencies to sort of assess that very fact. One of the criteria, this only happened in a few instances, but one of the questions they were asked to answer in the application was, could they accept partial funding? Yeah. There were a few grant applications that said they could not. And basically, unless what they were requesting was a smaller amount, we had to set them aside, because at that point we figured we likely are not going to be able to fund your program at 100%. So we did look to make sure that they could accept partial funding.
Okay. I will just say that you had so many agencies that you didn't fund that I really wish. There are two agencies that got two funding, and I think that's a little problem for me. Since you had others that you could look at and they weren't considered, and they scored within your 10. So I really had a concern about that, any group getting that. But thank you for letting me know how your thought process was in terms on how to fund. I just still think it's, you probably didn't have that discussion about what are we really trying to do with $1 million and how do we really get the biggest bang for our buck? And I think you may have, but I think for the council, we have to really think about what are we really trying to do with that $1 million and to make a big dent in social justice or anti-poverty. I think that's really critical for us to think about in the context of this particular project. Thank you.
Mr. McIntosh, you're next.
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you to Brenda and Gail and Mark and anybody else who's here representing the committee. I know from conversations I had with people who served on the committee that there's a tremendous amount of thought and energy put into this process, and it kind of strikes me as it was a three-dimensional matrix that had to be figured out. Lots of moving parts, lots of different agendas and things. But I really do want to say I appreciate all the efforts. And by the way, I went back and did the math on the CARF, and the amounts on the CARF do equal $1 million. So I think our numbers are correct there. But really, I just want to say thank you for all the intense effort I know you guys put in. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor, you have the floor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to echo Councilor McIntosh and Mayor Pro Tem Adams' comments. Mark, thank you so much. I know this wasn't on your wavelength when we asked you to head up the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, so thank you for taking this on. Mr. Chairman, I'm also glad that we're moving ahead and dealing with it today, because I think it was October when we started this, or maybe earlier. Yeah. It's been several months. It was intended to impact or try to have an impact on the community as a result of those things happening in the summer as well as the COVID. So I'm glad we're moving forward with it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, you have the floor.
I think what this project showed was an incredible amount of need in our community in the areas that we were looking at, and it's kind of awesome to think about it in those terms. I think what I walked away a little bit with is we gave a little bit of money to a lot of different people and a lot of firms rather, and we weren't able to fund a lot of organizations that maybe were worthy. I guess what I'm wondering, and maybe Tony can answer this, is how do we measure how impactful this program's been when you consider that sometimes they were asking for $200,000 to run a program and we gave them $12,000? And do we have any way of ultimately getting some sort of evaluation on what was accomplished out of this money? Do we ask for reports coming back to us, or how is this managed?
Ms. Tony.
Yes, Councilmember.
Go ahead.
Yes, Councilmember Larson, that's a great question. Once the list, or if the list is approved, the next step to that would be forming contractual agreements with all of the agencies. In the contract, they will be required to do some performance measures and report back to the city. We will probably issue payments up front, but then contractually we will require updates on the progress, what is the impact, who are you serving, and so we will then at the end of, say, a year, compile the information and report back to council on the impact related to social justice or poverty that these agencies made to the community.
I think because we didn't ask for matching funds or anything in these programs, it's clearly the scope of work from what the original application suggests, and what we're able to fund is quite different. And it's regrettable, but that's the way it is. And I'm happy to fund a lot of agencies, but clearly the impact is going to be less than maybe what everybody hoped for. I just would like to see a final report on this at some point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I say something, please?
Yes, Ms. Diggs, I see you there. Go ahead. Barbara, I'll get you next. Ms. Diggs, you have the floor.
This is Brenda Diggs. My address is 3609 Andrea Lane, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27105. First and foremost, it was, I consider it a privilege to be able to review and vet 118 applications after having vetted the same almost equal number for the COVID grant, as well as a different forum that had about the same number, which is not related to the city. But with that being said, I want the members of this committee to know that I take this seriously, as does the members of this entire committee. 118 grants is quite a large number. There were some that were duplicated in their ask. There were some that I had great concerns with that could not articulate what they were going to do with the funding, as well as what the expected outcomes would be. And I think I am one that I can say that I know quite a bit about a number of these different organizations that applied. And for me, the greater good is what the span is across the total community. How much could be done with what we were allocated to give out, recognizing that someone who someone else would feel was worthy or more deserving. But I do think we're in a time that we have to look at what is the greater good and how far and how widespread can these dollars and the benefit of these various programs be for our community. The other observation is, as with most grantees and people who apply for grants, there's a tremendous amount of duplication. And the question that I posed in this instance, as well as others, is there any kind of effort that you could have some collaboration where you can bring these small organizations together, some of whom just really are getting started? And I have some concerns about funding positions. I have some concerns about funding stipends and those kinds of things, especially when you're in a need or a situation where there are other needs that are greater and have much more impact. Great process. Wish you could do more, but it is, I want you to know, it's not something that we took lightly. I did not take it lightly, nor I think any of the other committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Diggs. Ms. Burke.
Yes, thank you so much. I wanted to start out by saying thank you to the committee. I understand the time that was involved to go through, read, and vet all of these applications. And I appreciate what Ms. Diggs did share, that you all took this charge most seriously. My concern is pretty similar to what I heard Councilmember Scipio say. We are looking at operating budgets, we're looking at requested amounts, and then when we look at the recommended amount, I'm concerned about what the organizations will be able to do with the recommended amount. Just how impactful will the amount be on our community and on our citizens? And when I think about many of the organizations and I wonder which services overlap, I'm wondering if we can combine some of these services provided by organizations and see if they can work together so that we're not just funding positions or operating expenses, so that we are actually making sure that the money goes directly toward helping citizens. So my concern is only regarding the impact that the money will have because it's spread so thin. Thank you.
I have a few comments, but I'm wait. See if does anybody else have anything? I don't see anyone's. First off, there were two committees that worked with this. The original committee, which came up with the 5 categories, and the second committee being what I call the bond committee, which actually allocated it. I want to thank everybody on both those committees. We have been at this quite a while. I will say, and this is someone on the line of Mrs. Burke and Ms. Scipio, this was not what I was expecting. I was expecting 4 to 5 projects, larger projects that would have a meaningful impact. My concern with this, a couple of concerns. One, there are several organizations that are getting money. There's an organization in here that has a $200 million budget, and we're giving them 1/10 of 1% of their budget. My concern is we have split the pie in so many pieces that it will diffuse the impact of it. I told the 2 folks that I appointed to the original committee, the first committee, is that I wanted minimal amount of the money going to overhead and as much as it could go to people. And I do not think we have done that, and for that reason, I will not be supporting this motion. Thank you. Do I have, I don't see any other comments. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
We have a motion from Mr. Taylor. Do we have a second?
Second, and I have comments after we get the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Ms. Adams.
Yes, Chair Clark and members of the committee and the council and the CBOC, all of you, I know all of you personally, and staff. The past year has been an anomaly. We're all learning as we go along. We didn't have a roadmap for none of this, neither did you. And we can't, I can't stress how important it is if we say we're going to do something based on time and people are in need, we need to go with it. And that's not saying that what the job that you did to make the decision for us, and truly we appreciate it. But I believe going forward, just like I was talking to some staff about other things this morning, that we learned from the experience, because there'll be more challenges coming at us coming down the road. There will be more money from the Rescue Act. There will be more money from HUD and Community Development Block Grants to help nonprofits and community need. I hate to say it, but this was like a trial act, a trial by fire. And I hope the community understands that we're not perfect because we don't have a roadmap. We don't have a plan. We're basing it off the experience of all of you that were on that committee to help us make this decision. But we last year made a commitment. And right now we are being faced like other cities on our Congressional Cities Conference board meetings and things last week, that as a city, we don't know how to distribute these funds in certain buckets. we don't really have a systems in place to get it done and make sure we check a box that it's right. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you. I hope the committee, the city understands and the community what we've had to do. But I look to this, to the council and the staff. This was our first trial by fire. And as we move forward, I hope we learn from the experience. And at the end of it, I hope that we're able to have Ms. Tony, Mr. Rao, some data as to how this all turned out, the first run, because before we can finish, they can finish, we're going to already in a couple of months have more, hopefully more money to distribute to the community. And again, thank you all.
Okay. Mr. Larson, one more comment, then we got to, and then Ms. Scipio, real quick.
Go to John.
John, and then you're up first.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, no, you're there. We hear you.
Okay. Quick question on when we go back to the various organizations with the proposed funding for them, do we anticipate they will receive all the money, or do we anticipate anybody will decline at that point? Is this a question for the committee or whatever? Obviously, some people are going to be severely reduced, and I'm just curious whether they think they'll be able to perform the program as funded, and if they're going to turn the money back in. I'm wondering if we should, how long do they think it would take to get that survey done?
Well, after the list gets approved, we will contact each of the organizations to let them know about their award amount. At that time, we would then proceed to enter into a contractual agreement with the agencies, and then create performance measures with the agencies in the contract. And so they would kind of guide us on what they're able to accomplish contractually with the resources awarded.
Do we anticipate anybody declining at that point?
It's definitely possible. All of the agencies were asked, would they accept partial funding? Obviously, that means something different to each agency. And so we would definitely ensure that they can actually receive this funding and actually provide the service or some type of social justice, anti-poverty type of initiative. If not, we would then definitely come back to the committee.
Mr. Larson, do you have any other comments?
No, I think that answers me. Thank you. Okay.
Ms. Scipio and then Mr. Mundy. Ms. Scipio.
Thank you. My concern is, I think, well, let's say I'm very committed to social justice and anti-poverty initiatives, as well as heritage preservation and education and mentoring and the neighborhood capacity building. I think those are all very important for us to take on as a city. And I think they should be very much part of our strategic plan that's going to happen in 2 weeks. I would very much like for us to roll this discussion of how this city really feels about taking on these areas and making a commitment to our community, using some of these ideas as action plans. And I think when we look at what we really want to do to reduce poverty and to look at social justice, when we really do it and identify where our gaps and needs are, we could better think about how we disperse this $1 million, as opposed to just sprinkling it to 45 groups. We really take a deep dive and say, this is intentional, this is going to make a change, this is going to have an impact. So I would like to the Finance Committee to consider postponing a decision on this today and moving it into our strategic plan so that we can have a serious discussion about our commitment to this topic.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Scipio. Mr. Mundy.
Thank you. I was remiss to not thank the group as well when I spoke earlier. So I wanted to do that to all of the committee members. I have been through the selection process for other organizations, and it is very time consuming, and I appreciate the effort. I have a question because I'm hearing from several council members, committee members, that you're not pleased with the outcome, and this does predate me. So was the committee given a list of criteria or any specific guidelines on the number of committees to fund, or what would they have used in order to bring back a product that this committee would be more pleased with at this point in time?
Yeah, let me ask if Mr. Rao and Ms. Tony could include in the package for next Monday night what Mr. Mundy's asking for, because we all did this back in October, and I think all our memories are a bit foggy, but we'll include that. Ms. Scipio, it's 49 agencies, if you want to know exactly how many it is. I counted them, but I think I have a motion I'm going to vote on in a minute, and if we want to do something different at the council meeting, the mayor chairs that, and he can handle that. We have a motion and a second on the floor. I will now poll the council members. Mayor Pro Tem Adams.
Yes.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Aye.
Councilmember Taylor.
Yay.
And the chair votes no. That is approved. We will now go to G4. And by the way, folks, we have two more items. They're informational, so Mr. Taylor, I think, will be out in time for your committee. G4 is the monthly revenue update. I think, Miss Tony, you're going to be back up. Mr. Rao, Miss Tony, whoever wants to comment on this. We lost Patrice, so Mr. Rao, you're up.
Okay. Give me a moment. I'm going to pull up. So, we've been providing the council monthly updates on our revenue collections. And really, the ones that we've been most focused on are our major revenue sources in the general fund.
By the way, Ben, she's posted it for us, so we've got it.
Very good, very good. So, and really from month to month, the ones that have really changed, our sales tax collections and our occupancy tax collections, and you can see there on the table there for March that our budget for the current fiscal year was $217 million in general fund revenues. We're now projecting $214 million, so about 1.1% less than budget, which, considering the assumptions that we were basing it on, you can see there that probably the one revenue source that's significant and it probably really is one. You had to put a qualifier as the fund balance appropriation, because that's based on what we're projecting our spending to look like for the general fund. So we had projected $5.4 million in use of fund balance for general fund. We're now projecting we'd only use 1.1 million. So that's actually a good thing. Yeah. We're showing something significantly less. So if you look at our major revenue sources there, property taxes are about on budget. That's billed out at the back in August. It's due, by early January. So we know kind of what that's going to be, and that's based on valuations that were put in place, in January of 2020. The one that really has been, I think, the most eye-opening has been our sales tax collections. We were very conservative with our budgeting going into this fiscal year, assuming that a much deeper recession than I think we've realized. And so thankfully, our sales tax collections have trended much better than our budget through, I believe this is through December. So you can see there almost 16% projection ahead of budget. And then we've got some other revenue sources there under intergovernmental revenues. That includes the utility sales taxes that we receive for electricity, natural gas, video programming, and telecommunications. And electricity, we took a little bit saw a little bit of a lower collection rate on that. But that's kind of where we stand, in terms of the general fund. And then some of the other charts you can see there, you can see how sales tax is trending compared to prior year and our projections. Occupancy taxes, that's one as we're still seeing, really no recovery. As we know, the travel and tourism industry has been impacted severely by the pandemic. And so you can see that our collections, our monthly collections there have trended well under what we had collected, the same period in the previous fiscal year. And I think that a lot of that's going to be driven by the extent that we'll be able to reopen, those facilities and reopen the economy, and travel and tourism picks back up. And it could be some time before we see those revenues trend back in a positive direction. And then I think some of the other charts, the utility franchise tax revenues I mentioned a minute ago there, that right now the projection is about $800,000 below budget. I think that's driven mainly by, I think, electricity, sales tax, maybe some video programming. And then we all know about the Fairgrounds Fund and what we're projecting in terms of our reserves there. So still, that projection hasn't changed. Still projecting about to be $1 million in the negative in terms of our cash reserves. And then in terms of our parking fund, again, projecting about $250,000 negative position in our cash reserves there. So sales taxes are trending better than budget. That's going to be a real key in terms of how we budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So I think that will help us, and we'll just have to continue to monitor very closely, Oxby tax revenues and what kind of adjustments we might have to make in that fund, because it does fund contributions to a number of agencies. It does provide some support to the fairgrounds and to the Benton.
Thank you, sir. Questions, Mr. McIntosh, you had your hand up first.
Ben, back up in the table on the first page under other revenues. You may have said this and I missed it, but we're down 30% there. What goes in that category?
Yes, Councilman McIntosh, that is part of that is the reimbursement that we had originally budgeted to receive from the county for the school resource officer program, and because the phasing out of the city's involvement with that program was accelerated, we don't have the expense. So while yes, we were just looking at the revenue side and seeing those revenues down, we're not realizing the expense either. So there should be an offset there. There should be no net impact to the general fund budget because we're not funding those positions anymore. Those officers were assigned to other vacant positions. And so even though the reimbursement has gone down, the expense has gone down as well.
Thank you.
Absorbed into
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeff.
They were, excuse me, absorbed into WSPD?
That's correct. Yes, sir. We had vacancies, in the other areas of the operation, and we were just able to move those school resource those officers, the employees, into those vacant positions, and that left those SRO positions, now vacant, and so we're not incurring any cost against those positions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Adams.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, Mr. Rao, the sales tax. The naysayers will say no, but that's stimulus money. And that's people staying at home, going to the grocery store every day and calling Grubhub and everybody else. And that's where that money is coming from. People going to Lowe's and Home Depot, and they're building things and they're gardening and things like that. And that's that number right there. That's the citizens and people that made the regular folk that made that happen. It will be interesting to see now that the third round of stimulus is hitting people's accounts, what that number is going to look like. This is for what, March? What it'll look like for April and May for us going into budget season. I predict that number is going to go up even more. What do you think?
Mayor Pro Tem Adams, I think that you're right. And that's why we're going to revisit our assumptions that we are using to project for fiscal year 21-22. I think we're going to end this year in a much better position with our sales tax collections. So it's just finding that right balance of still trying to be appropriately conservative, but not being so overly conservative that we're putting undue stress on the budget. So thankfully we get these collections every month. And you're right, we know that there's another round of stimulus that is coming, and from what I've read, there's no indication that that's going to change, behavior. I think if nothing else, they'll just continue to do exactly that, stimulate the economy.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you had your hand up.
Very quickly, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think some good news there, obviously, but when we look at those fund balances and fairgrounds and parking and others, I know we're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan here in a moment, but I think we really got to shore those back up and get our reserves back up so we can breathe a little easier. As you know, Chairman Clark and I talked the other day that we don't want to come anywhere as close to losing our AAA bond rating if we can figure out a way to shore our reserves back up using those funds, although there's some question of whether or not you can actually do it or not, but I know we can use it to replace revenues, but the fund balance might be a little bit more difficult, but we've got to get ourselves back into a stronger financial situation.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think Ms. Adams is right on. The reason, if you go back to the Great Recession of 08, 09, it took us 4 or 5 years to get sales tax revenue back to, say, 07 level. Doing that, and I'm doing this from memory, I think when President Obama first came in, I think they passed about an $800 billion stimulus package. Counting the one just done, we're over $4 trillion, so that's 5 times more money has been dumped in from the government, federal government down, than in the last Great Recession, and that certainly is shown there. And I think, as Ms. Adams also alluded to, I think we'll have good sales tax revenue for the next couple of months, maybe many months after that, we'll see. I would appreciate if the staff, Ms. Tony, I see you back, thank you. If y'all could include a graph on the fund balance in the mass transit fund, I would think it's struggled with, well, for a couple of months, nobody rode a bus because nobody was working. So if we could just include that, just maybe send it out to everybody, but you don't need to comment on it, just so we'll have that information. Any other questions or comments? We'll remind everybody it's not, is it next week that I think we have the strategic plan?
Yes, sir.
24th, 25th. Okay. So just remind everybody, it's been mentioned a few times, but that is certainly coming up. And the last item on the agenda, we got 20 minutes left, is an update on the American Rescue Plan. Mr. Rout, I guess that comes under your category as well. You have the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Clark. Meredith, would you pull up the presentation for me? Okay, thank you. So, last week, President Biden signed into law the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 after the House of Representatives approved the Senate version of that legislation. If you'll go to slide 2, Meredith. So just a very high level, it's a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus package intended to accelerate the country's recovery, both from a health standpoint and from an economic standpoint from the pandemic. The legislation is over 600 pages in length. I know a lot of organizations are already working through it and providing all kinds of summaries about all the different provisions provided for in the law. It does include $350 billion in assistance to state, local, and tribal governments. They're called the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. Of that amount, $65 billion is specifically for cities and towns. And there's 2 categories of cities and towns there, what they call metropolitan cities, and those are larger cities that receive community development block grant funding. They're called CDBG entitlement cities. And then you have your non-entitlement cities, the smaller cities, and the states will receive funding and then pass those through to those cities and towns. So a significant part of the legislation, obviously, for local governments. Go on to the next slide there. So wanted to talk about the eligible uses of the local fiscal recovery fund. I'm not going to read the 4 different ones, but this is the exact language that's in the law. But the first one there basically is allowing the use of the funds, to deal with the health emergency, both from the actual pandemic itself and also the negative impact of the pandemic. And you can see there that could potentially include assistance to households, small businesses, nonprofits, and aid to impacted industries like the tourism, travel, and hospitality industries. The second eligible use would be providing assistance to workers performing essential work, and that could come in the form of providing premium pay to eligible workers for local governments. Also, there towards the end of that particular use, it just says, and providing grants to eligible employers that have eligible workers who perform essential work. So this one potential use would be providing some form of premium pay to eligible workers. The third use noted there is basically offsetting a reduction in revenue that a local government has experienced in providing their services to the community. This one, we're really going to be looking closely at what kind of guidance we get from the Treasury Department, because it's a reduction based on the revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year prior to the pandemic, which for us would be fiscal year 18-19, because we know the pandemic really started we started experiencing the impacts from that in the last quarter of fiscal year 19-20. So we're really going to be looking closely at the guidance there. And then lastly, another eligible use would be to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. The one prohibition that was very clear in the legislation is that the funding cannot be deposited in pension funds. So it cannot be used to prop up any kind of pension funds of local governments. Moving to the next slide and just talk a little bit more about the requirements. The funds will be distributed in what they call in 2 tranches. The first one will be paid no later than 60 days after enactment of the legislation. So the legislation was signed into law on last Thursday. So 60 days from that, we would expect the first tranche, which would be 50% of our allocation. And then the second tranche would be paid 12 months after the first tranche is paid. Another requirement is that the funds can be spent on costs incurred through December 31st, 2024. So it's not just looking back at what we've already incurred, but also looking forward and what expenditures we may be incurred, still trying to respond to the impacts of the pandemic. That we know that there will be reporting requirements from the Treasury Department, so we'll have to have a great understanding of what that will involve. And then the allocations, we know those who've been following it, what the allocations are estimated to be right now, but the allocations will be based on the most recent data from the Census Bureau. So again, that's another detail we'll look closely at to see how our most recent census data may come to bear in terms of perhaps the final allocation of funds. So having said that, the cities of Winston-Salem's allocation under this provision of the Act totals $55.1 million. So we wanted to just take a moment to present some ideas to the mayor and council about how the funds potentially could be used here in our community. The first one, and the mayor alluded to this, would be the restoration of our reduced revenues. Again, we are not sure what the guidance is going to say in terms of being able to restore fund balances that we've used or exhausted, but certainly it looks like it could be an offset to any reduced revenues. And so with knowing that, we're going to be focusing on, as you saw in the monthly revenue update, the general fund, the water and sewer fund, parking, really all of our public assembly facilities, fairgrounds, the convention center, ballpark, Bowman Gray Stadium, our Oxby tax fund, and stormwater. So we're going to look at all of our funds that we think where we think we experienced reduced revenues. A second idea for a potential use would be providing small business restoration grants. And these would focus on existing businesses. It wouldn't necessarily be providing startup capital for small businesses, but assisting existing businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. An important component of this would be ensuring that there's an equitable provision of the grants to minority and women-owned businesses. We may even look to partner with a local organization like Greater Winston-Salem Inc. to assist with administering a program like this, but this would be another idea. Thirdly, we could potentially use the funds to provide relief to the local travel tourism nonprofits. One of the eligible uses didn't specifically mention the travel tourism and hospitality industry. The city currently provides annual contributions to Old Salem, the National Black Theater Festival, the Piedmont Film Commission, River Run, and the Arts Council. We could look at an approach that would base any kind of relief on the revenue losses that these organizations have experienced. One question that can be discussed, would we expand the availability of funding under this use to organizations that haven't applied for funding but are still very much a part of the travel and tourism industry. And then one other idea that we had under this category would be to utilize some of the funds to prepare our public assembly facilities to be able to open up and operate still under perhaps restricted capacity, but still do so safely. And that would be Bowman Gray Stadium, it would be Truist Stadium, the Convention Center, the fairgrounds, all those facilities, so that we can, as executive orders allow, be able to increase our activity in those facilities, but do so safely. And then lastly, another idea would be to replace equipment that was deferred as due to the pandemic's impact on our budget for the current year for 21-22. Yes, year in, year out, we often have more in requests than we have capacity in the budget, but this was, I think, particularly a challenge for 21-22. And so we would look perhaps to utilize some of the funds to replace vehicles and equipment in police, fire, sanitation, and our other public works areas, and really utilize the funds as pay-go money. So we spend it, we buy the equipment, and we're not financing it. It's not a lease payment that stretches over 5 years and is an ongoing part of the budget, but we pay for the replacement of the equipment and we've met those deferred replacement needs. But across all four of these categories, I think really the theme, two themes here. One is to focus on restoration, and then also to really focus on one-time needs, not making investments or incurring expenditures in something that will have an ongoing impact on the city's operating budget. Next slide. So in terms of just next steps, as I mentioned a moment ago, we're still waiting for the specific guidelines from the U.S. Treasury Department, really to get even more clarity on what the eligible uses of the funds will be. Also to understand what kind of reporting requirements we'll need to meet, in order to use the funds, and then just any other requirements that may come out as part of those guidelines. In the meantime, staff were already reviewing the other sections of the law, and in fact, we already know that through information from the North Carolina Metropolitan Mayors Coalition, that we are going to receive some additional funding for public transit in a different part of the act. $11.3 million is already allocated to the city, so we're really almost up to $66.5 million in total funding, as we know at this point. But we know there are other sections in the act about housing and about rent assistance, and so we're going through that. We are checking the other national organizations like the National League of Cities and the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the International City County Management Association, just trying to make sure we stay plugged in and are informed about what will be available in this legislation. We'll be prepared to act on that, certainly utilizing Ms. Mazingo through Strategics Consulting to assist us, in seeking those additional funds. So I didn't take that third bullet out, but we will obviously continue to provide updates to the mayor and council. And at a certain point down the road, we will present a specific proposal to you all perhaps one approach would be to look at the outcome of the strategic planning sessions that'll take place next week, and to take from that some guidance about how city staff will further develop ideas for how the city will utilize these funds. And also in the meantime, we're going to be working on kind of how we can develop our internal capacity to be able to manage the funds from a staff perspective. We're already thinking about creating a web page to make sure that we're very transparent with the public in terms of how we use these funds and the outcomes that we hope to achieve, and maybe even being a resource to disseminate information about other provisions of the legislation that other stakeholders in the community, whether it's individuals or whether it's small businesses, may look at for information. If nothing else, just links to other more authoritative sources, but so that they're they are informed and know of what will be available through this act. So that's a very kind of high level overview with some just general ideas at this point, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll take some general questions. I would ask staff maybe to touch base with each one of the council members as we go forward with this. I'll also ask that Ms. Adams, who has connections to the National League of Cities, and Mr. McIntosh, who has connections to the North Carolina League, and Ms. Tallies, please work with those folks. It's the same information, and there's thousands of cities, hundreds in the state, thousands in the country. So once somebody does the homework for one, it kind of applies to everybody. And I don't know, I know Ms. Carmen's actually in the room here. I don't know if the Chapel Hill folks, the
School of Government.
School of Government, thank you. If the School of Government is going to do anything here or not, but it would, we got to go from 0 to 60 real quick, but we really do need to understand the rules so we don't have to give the money back. Sure. But at the same time, we want to be sure it's handled properly. And the other comment I would make, and then I'll open it up here, is Ms. Adams mentioned this earlier with the first grant we talked about, but a lot of this stuff we've never done before, and right now we're struggling with how to do the rent assistance, and now we're going to struggle with how to do the small business assistance. So we got to get on this learning curve real quick. With that, I'll recognize comments. Mr. Mundy, you were first, and then Ms. Scipio after that. Mr. Mundy.
Thank you, Chair Clark. I just want to point out two businesses that I know have suffered greatly under COVID because they followed the rules. Mm-hmm. They couldn't make any money at all. And those are our local bars, which are critical for the long-term workforce coming into Winston-Salem. They've not been able to earn even a portion of funding. So, however we do it, we need to push some people to the front of the line. And these people who have followed the governor's laws and rules and made sure that they didn't become super spreaders, they need to be rewarded. By the same token, those businesses that we've cited because they did not follow the mandates, I don't think it's right to give those folks money. So we need to put that into the mix as well. And the other organizations are particularly arts organizations who have earned revenue. I'm not as concerned about those whose budgets are completely unearned revenue, but earned revenue, live theaters, symphonies, they again could not perform. And this has been really, really devastating to their budgets. So those are two organizations I just want to make sure we front load whenever possible.
Thank you. Hey, Bo, I got a lot of folks here. I'll get through them as quick as I can. Ms. Scipio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we look at the city, outside the community, our residents, our neighbors, all of the different businesses, let us not forget our employees. If there's a way to make sure we can give them perhaps a bonus out of this money. They have not had any merit raises in several years. And many of them have stood the test of time during COVID, being essential workers. And I think we need to recognize our employees and see if we cannot give them at least a bonus of some sort in recognition of their continued service to our city.
Thank you, Ms. Scipio. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And it's Councilmember Mundy was saying, I too have been concerned, obviously, about our restaurants, bars, difficult times. So my initial thoughts was maybe we use some of our monies for that. But the good news is, I believe there is it's either 250 or 350 billion dollars in this act specifically for help to restaurants. So once Ben can dig into that a little bit, Mr. Mundy, I think we'll have some specific dollars going to restaurants and bars. So I hope so anyway.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. McIntosh.
Yeah, I want to just let everybody know that I stand ready to back Mr. Mundy up and do everything I can to support our taverns. Secondly, I want to say another shout out to the League of Cities and Dee Dee's work there. I mean, I think that was incredibly positive and impactful in this whole conversations. The League of Cities and the North Carolina League of Municipalities really do some heavy lifting, and anytime we can shout out to them, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Okay. Mr. Larson, excuse me.
I would like to simply add to the wish list. I think one group that has been heavily hit is our hotels, particularly our downtown hotels with the convention center being damaged or offline. And we know that they are critical to create the funding for the occupancy tax too. So it's sort of a joint hit there. I'm anxious to hopefully put them at the front of the line as well.
Okay. Thank everybody for those comments. I think, Mr. Rao, that was a good introduction, and we will learn as we go. We will learn quickly, and we'll all have plenty of opportunities for input into this. This is not something that's going to happen in a day. The federal government's got to issue more specific guidelines and things of that sort before we can get into it, but we will. With that, I've got 3 till, so I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Mr. Taylor, you're on 6 o'clock, I believe, for public safety. Thank everybody for joining tonight. We're adjourned.